Well, a lot happening around the Saints at the moment in terms of some key decisions. There is the ongoing battle between President Andrew Bassett and the AFL in regards to academies, to a lesser extent father-sons, but certainly academies. There's been the decision in the last couple of days for St Kilda to split with Sandringham and form their own standalone VFL side from next season, something which has been in the offing for a little while. And we thought we'd go back and have a chat to a president who had to make a lot of big decisions at a time of significance for the club. That is Rod Butterss. And Rod, thank you very much for joining us.
Great. It's good to be with you.
Starting off with that, Andrew Bassett's current stance against the AFL and the academies, and, for probably back in your time, it would have been COLA and cost of living and that type of stuff. Has the imbalance gone too far, I guess, and do you agree with Andrew's stance on trying to not just fly the flag for us, but for equality, for want of a better expression?
Oh, look, I think Andrew has been courageous and very bold and brave on behalf of the club and the industry. I know in my time, negotiating with the AFL was always very, very challenging because they see it from their perspective. They don't really get it from a club perspective. And we clubs are, fighting hard, doing our best. And look, from a practical perspective, I don't know how many hundreds of millions of dollars that the AFL have invested in the, those clubs, the Greater Western Sydney and the Swans and Gold Coast, etc. But from their perspective, they would see it that they have an investment to protect. But there's a lot of things that aren't fair in AFL. You look, for example, a simple one is I think we get to play at the MCG once a year unless we make finals. I think Collingwood travel significantly less than every other club. The system is not fair. And I don't think they particularly mind that it's not fair. So all credit to Andrew to take it on. He's a bright guy and he's got the courage. I was going to say something else. He's got the courage. So good on him.
Rod, at the time when you were there and Grant obviously as coach, there was a lot of talk about the relationship between Grant and Andrew Demetriou at the AFL and the club and AFL headquarters by extension. Do you still feel that there was a vendetta from HQ against our footy club? And do you think that happens these days?
I wouldn't use the term vendetta. I think that's a bit strong. But there is no interest like self-interest. So Andrew was, running the AFL, and I thought he did a pretty good job overall. We were running the Saints and doing our very best. And I remember once I criticised the AFL, and there was a headline on the back page of the Herald Sun, canning me for it. And it was quite fascinating because I had a little holiday house down the coast, and I picked up the newspaper and I read it and I thought, you bastard. And I turned around. There was Ron Evans standing next to me, quite coincidentally. And I said, Ron, have a look at this. Have a look at this. That's bullshit. And he said, son, have you got time for coffee? And he was a bit of a mentor of mine. And he sort of sat me down and explained, the dynamics between clubs, the dynamics between clubs and the AFL, and how the AFL actually did operate. And it operates like a business that's trying to steer its path toward their goal. And sometimes when that happens, certain members of the industry get overlooked. And we've been overlooked on a number of issues. We tried to go to the MCG as our home base. We ended up being pushed toward Marvel, the current issues. And Tomo he struggled with their power. Let me say that. As we all did at the time.
So going back a bit further, before you joined the club off the field, you were actually part of the club on the field to begin with. So back in the 70s, playing reserves at a club and that sort of thing, going back to the point where you were part of the club off the field, do you think that having that on-field experience and behind the scenes of playing and that sort of thing, did it have any influence on the way you were part of the board at the club and the way that you sort of took things more personally if you're that involved earlier on?
I don't know that I took things more personally, but having spent 4 or 5 years there playing reserve grade footy, and I was only young. Went there when I was 16. I wasn't good enough, by the way, but I think being involved in the system and as a young bloke getting to know the likes of Graham Huggins and Alan Jeans and Greeny, and it wasn't new to me. It was a business, but it was a business I felt that I understood because of my playing days, even though it was only seconds. And it was really important for me to pull together a board that had real competency, like real competency. People like, I'll give you an example. Mark Kellett was our director of football. Mark played 150 odd games for 3 clubs, and he was coached by Hafey, Jeans, and Malthouse. He then went and built a very, very successful business over a 20-year period. So Mark brought first-hand playing knowledge at senior level, the wisdom of the likes of Hafey and Jeans, and business skills. So we were very blessed. We also had another fellow who doesn't get a lot of mention, but Glenn Casey, who played seconds footy with us and one senior game. He played one senior game where Arnold Brightus kicked 6 on him. Probably only played one. But Glenn's knowledge of a thing called root cause analysis, which we used daily to make our decisions, and his comprehension of data and analytics gave us a real advantage. And I remember, a member came up to me once and said, "We want to be the next Collingwood." And I said, No, we will never be Collingwood. We're St Kilda, and we have to be guerrilla warfare in our tactics because we don't have the army. We don't have the balance sheet. So we just had to try and sort of outsmart them with like guerrilla warfare tactics. And that's where Glenn Casey was brilliant with his data and analytics and his root cause analysis. And Mark Kellett was equally, I think, brilliant. The other guy that gets, I think, horribly underrated is Brian Waldron. Brian built that list. He came to me at the end of the first season, which wasn't great. We finished, I think, on the bottom, and we lost a lot of money. And I knew I was out of my depth. And he came to me and he said, "Rocket, we're going to trade out Peter Everett, Barry Hall, Shane and Darryl Wakelin." And I said, "You what? What? They're 4 of our best players." He said, "I know. But if you look at our list, our list isn't ready to compete seriously in finals. We need to build a list." And he traded them out, and he bought in Rewalt, Kazisi, Ball, Clark, Del Santo, a host of others. And then he brilliantly traded for Aaron Hamill and Fraser Garrick. I mean, that was pure genius. So we were blessed to have had a guy that, in my view, has got the highest FIQ I've ever met, football intelligence.
Now, on that, we spoke to Brian Waldron, we spoke to Andrew Plimpton in the past, and obviously you took over from Andrew. Andrew had to go through the 90s where it was the move from Waverley to Docklands, the grand final of 97, the period where the AFL was merging clubs, and we were in that conversation, but obviously survived it. But within a few months of you taking over, we had the Malcolm Blight raid in Queensland. We had, as you say, Rewalt and Kazitsky come in through the draft, Hamill, Garrick, Voss, a number of others as well. Pretty hectic start. At what point did Operation Blight begin? Was that day one? Was it before you arrived? Like, how did that mission start?
No, at that time, I think I became president in the August or September, and we, Tomo and I and Wally Waldron, we mapped out a bit of a plan as to how to go and secure Malcolm, and the plan worked. But it also failed, as you know, probably because we didn't do enough due diligence. We were young and a bit dumb, I think. But we were able to rebound from that and learn from that. And, I think we finished, I can't remember exactly where, but down near the bottom in 2000. And we played off in a preliminary final in 2004, which we should have won. And then, like almost anyone would have beaten Brisbane the following week because they were They were banged up,
Mm.
you know. So, you know, bit of luck, bit of bad luck. People ask me, what is it with the Saints? You know, we've won one premiership in 151, is it, years? And I said, all I can imagine is it's the great Shakespearean tragedy of the AFL. It's almost impossible to explain why. I mean, that ball that bounced in front of Milne, come on. You know, I looked up to the heavens and I gave him a very good talking to. That was just, and we've been bloody unlucky. I actually said to Alan Jeans, many years ago, I said, Yabby, you've coached us to 1, you've coached Hawthorne to 3. What's the difference? And he said, there is no difference, Rod. No difference. I was hoping he'd give me a clue. And he said, the only thing I can tell you is we have sold more more players to other clubs that have gone on to win premierships in order to balance our books, historically, particularly. And he said, no, laddie, there ain't no difference.
Rod, you've been very open over the last couple of years about your journey and struggles over a number of levels, and I'm sure that we'll get into some of those details coming soon. But if we take a step back to just before the last question, how did you become president? I think you're on record as saying Grant kind of pushed you to run for president, to become president. How did that happen? And I guess what was your motivations at that time?
Well, I was a coterie member and I just sold a business and done pretty well. So I was sort of semi-retired at age 39 or 40, whatever it was. And we went out to a game at Waverley and I think we were 5 goals up and Hawthorne knocked us off and Tomo turned around to me and he said, come on, Rocket, let's fix this. And we went and had a meeting with Andrew, and a beautiful man, and he said he was about to step down. And I said, well, mate, I'm ready to step up. Andrew didn't support me initially. He supported another fellow who was on the board. But my view was we needed some serious challenging. You know, we needed to be bold and brave and take some risks. And the other fellow I thought was conservative. So we had but what was it? It wasn't a discussion. It was political lobby over a period of 6 or 9 months. And one day we had a meeting, and I won't go into what happened, but Andrew said, I'm going to resign. And so it was 6-all, the vote. So with Andrew resigning, the other fellow resigned, and by accident I became pres. But I've always loved underdogs and love turning things around. In my businesses, it's what I've been able to do, turn things around. And I just love the challenge and working with great people and backing people who were a little bit different, not quite the norm. Like when we appointed Ross, when we appointed Tomo, people said, why didn't you go and get Mickey Malthouse? And I said, well, because I want the next Mick Malthouse, not the old one. So that was our view. We wanted to be bold, we wanted to be brave, and we make no excuse for that.
So there's been a number of things changing recently, things that are coming into place soon. The reserves are coming back for us, and it's just obviously it's an ever-changing scape ahead of us. Some of the things that changed in your time. What think maybe had a biggest impact on the club as a whole? Like in 2000, before you get there, we lose our reserves. We'd only played off in a grand final in 99, 2000. We stopped that.
97.
Later on.
99 reserves
in the
played in the grand
reserves.
final.
Yep,
yeah.
and then the reserves stopped. So we go to Springvale to start with, obviously, and then Sandringham later on. Many say we probably should have gone to Sandringham to begin with, but that didn't happen. We moved from Waverley to the Docklands.
Yep.
Later on, we moved from Moorabbin to down to Seaford. What's some of the biggest decisions you think that have impacted the club, and what's something that you think that a decision that probably should have been made that probably would have had a positive impact on the club up to this date?
That's a good question. I'm probably not one to reflect too heavily on, what happened yesterday. It's my whole thing in life is what we're going to do tomorrow. I was bitterly disappointed with our move to Seaford. I was on record as saying that Seaford over my dead body, which it was. So, I think the Seaford move was a bloody disaster, quite frankly. I can't think of any other particular issue. That if we went back and said, would I do things differently? I think we would have put a bit more due diligence into the Blight appointment. I think one of the things I noticed firsthand, and it wasn't just to do with my relationship with Tomo, but having gotten to know a lot of coaches and speaking to them. One coach said to me once, who didn't last long as a coach, but he said, coaching took me to places that no man should ever go. Mm-hmm. I think the pressure on coaches is just extraordinary. And I'm often amazed, and impressed, I must say, when I see someone like Fagan sitting next to Clarkson, and I see Barmy standing behind Hardwick, and I see, Cookie and these, great mentoring types of fellows. And when you coach, like Tomo was, I think, without being critical, he was autocratic. But we're only human, and you need to go and have a good piss and moan sometimes, and a good, ability to say to someone like a Yabby or a Tom Hafey or a wise old cat, hey, how do you reckon I'm going? And just get some honest feedback. I hope that answers your question.
Should we have stayed in Tassie further to that with the, obviously Hawthorne and us were playing in Launceston. I know Grant, I think, had been a bit outspoken that, it wasn't in our best interest in terms of winning flags to be selling home games. And I totally understand the merit in that. But I guess if you look at the success that Hawthorne have had in that venture, should we perhaps have stayed there?
Look, I think the easier decision was to say, let's play our home games at Docklands. Mm-hmm. But Hawthorne proved that it could be done, and the benefits that certainly were financial, and you've got to be financial. Otherwise, if you're not financial, you're in the soup kitchen. You've got them bailing you out. And when they're bailing you out, they're calling your shots. Well, you don't want to lose that independence ever. So, I had a different view to Tomo than that. I thought we should have continued to play there and guts it out. Yeah, was it easy? No, but clubs have overcome these challenges in the past. Like, clubs like the West Coast Eagles have got to travel halfway across three-quarters away across the country every second week. You can do it, but you've got to have the right mindset. We differed on that one. And Tomo is, I'm sure you'll appreciate, a very, very strong character. So once he formed
as well,
once he forms a view on something, he's very, very difficult to. He was very, very difficult to shift that view, and I, just naturally, are much more collaborative. So if I'm sitting in a board meeting, or if I'm sitting in a footy department meeting, I want people to have a view, and try and appreciate other people's points of view for the overall betterment of the club, rather than just one guy calling all the shots.
The decision to move on from Malcolm Blight and replace him with Grant Thomas. Walk us through your recollection of that period.
Oh, very simple. Jim Watts was our chief executive, and I walked into the club one day and Jim said, Rod, you got 5 minutes? He called me into his office. I sat down. He said, I don't think Malcolm's heart's in it. And I said, okay. So we started to have a bit of a closer look. It's a personal view, but I think Malcolm was one of the last great intuitive coaches. His intuition, but by around 99, 2000, 2001, the game became more data driven, and I didn't think that was Malcolm's strength. when we appointed Tomo, he had a good understanding of data. When we appointed Ross, he had a brilliant understanding of data. And in fact, we changed our recruitment policy and our drafting policy away from a person's opinion, whoever it might be, that it had to be supported by the data. And not exhaustive data, but pretty simple data. And that was one of the things Brian was very good at. He could show me on a matrix the 18 to 21, 21 to 24, 24 to 27, 27 plus, the various positions, the A graders, the B graders, the C graders, I say respectfully, and why we could therefore be competitive enough to play off in grand finals. And those underlying principles were very, very, very important. Because when you've got a strong personality in the room, they want to win the day. And, what wins is the strong personality, not necessarily the right decision. So data can help you support that. And I thought we did that really well in later on.
So you removed Malcolm and Grant is installed as the senior coach, kind of almost out of nowhere from a fan perspective. Did he come to you? Did you go to him? How did that happen?
A bit of both. We were both, I think, sales guys, and there was a bit of political jockeying. I thought Grant could coach at an AFL level because he delivered 4 flags at Warrnambool. Now I don't care where you're delivering flags, whether it's AFL level or another senior level. If you're used to delivering flags, you know what it takes. And he delivered 4, and he knew what it took. And in his first 3 or 4 years, he was bloody fantastic. In terms of bringing those young kids along and helping work with Brian to build the list. And, as I said, we played off in the 04 prelim. He wanted the gig. Make no mistake, he was pretty shitty with me when I said we were going to have we were going to interview others. He didn't like that very much, but that's okay. You in business, in life, you have differing points of view. You negotiate, and you arrive at an outcome, which is what happened. And I thought he did a bloody good job.
And just to tie that bit off there, there's always a bit of a split decision between fans of, was senior coach his best position? A lot feel that football manager was probably more the kind of person that he was rather than the senior coach. And because the way he talked to the players, the way he brought the players together, like he quite often we heard stories about him hosting a player at his house round for dinners and all sorts of things. Was the senior coach the position that he really should have been?
Oh, I've no doubt. And I think if you look at the win-loss ratio statistics, that says it. So yes, his style was somewhat different. He brought more of a business sort of approach to it. And I understand the fans would probably have felt better if we had appointed a Malthouse or someone like that. I get it. But I think sometimes you just got to back yourself in and recognise that, we were in the middle of the organisation. We felt we understood what we needed. We had good people like Jim Watts, like Brian Waldron, like Glenn Casey, like Mark Kellett, Ray King, who's actually Max's grandfather was on my board as well. All good people. And it wasn't the Rod show. It was not the Rod show. So we would have good debate, good discussion, and arrive at a conclusion, an outcome. And, sometimes I had to work overtime selling my view, but that's just life. So I was really comfortable with it. And I thought his record proved itself. If Paul Guerra had to kick that goal, we'd have another bloody flag cupboard.
There's a few of those comments, that's for sure, over the journey. But it felt like, from a fan's point of view, that yourself and Grant came along at the right time for the club. The club was in a bit of turmoil, and we turned things around very quickly and almost climbed the mountain. But as you've mentioned there were a lot of robust conversations. There were a lot of robust personalities, and it's no secret that your relationship with Grant fell away. Is it fair to say that you're probably in a position where you both had the same interest at heart, you both probably have respect for that passion, but there was a fundamental disagreement in philosophy that couldn't be overcome?
I think that's a fair comment. Yeah, I think that's a fair comment. And I think, if I look at executives, and I'll call a coach an executive for the sake of the conversation. Who was it? I can't remember. But coaches have to grow with the game. You can't stay sort of with your plan from 5 years ago, because the opposition coaches work it out. So I'm just lost on the guy that coached for Sheedy. Had the ability to grow and adapt and continually drive change, which was a great advantage. And if I look at executives in business, if they're there much more than 5 or 6 years, you've got to be careful, because we just become robotic. And then it's too easy for the opposition coaches, or in business, the opposition, to work us out. We've got to be ahead of the game. Like Roosie was ahead of the game, even though the AFL didn't like his game style. He won a flag or two, I think. So it's just my view. You've got to stay ahead of the game, and to do that, you've got to take some risks.
Is there any sort of relationship with GT, and by extension with the footy club these days?
Oh, I have a relationship with the footy club, sure. I have no relationship with Grant. He won't take my calls. Fine, I get it. So you move on. But I talk to former players, and I talk to Andy Bassett, and I talk to Wally, and and I get along to. I don't get along to every game because I've got other interests. I'm still involved. In fact, they gave me life membership last year. I couldn't believe it.
Do you wish there was, I guess, just as intertwining, do you wish there was, given what you and Grant built, do you wish there was some relationship still?
Of course, life's too short to have the sheds. Yeah, absolutely. And we did achieve a lot of great things together, and we had to make a very tough call back in the end of, I think it was 06.
Yeah.
And that was not easy, but, I'm philosophical. You get over these things, you leave things behind you, move forward, repair relationships where you can. Andrew didn't support me as the next prep, but once I was in the gig, he was phenomenally supportive. And that just shows me a man of his caliber and capability. And I think that's leadership, to be frank. We don't want a Trump Musk scenario.
Now, Nick touched on it a little bit earlier. You've come out and told a few places that during the tenure at the club, you did drink a little bit. You were alcoholic.
I was alcoholic, yes.
Yes. And you've said it had an effect on, I guess, the day-to-day workings of yourself at the club and decisions you made and that sort of thing. Take us through just how it sort of worked for yourself. How did a normal day start? Was it a thing of you were getting up and or you were starting drinking early, or was it from the night before you would coming in the morning and that sort of thing? Or how did it all go?
Okay, let me try and explain it. First thing was I was one of the lunch artists of the 80s and 90s. And the way we did business, we went to lunch, we drank, and I didn't wake up one day and decide to become an alcoholic. It was sort of, I won't say it's genetically exposed, but when I made the comment, it was to Mark at the Herald Sun, Mark Robinson, that I made decisions as an alcoholic. What I was trying we didn't drink at board meetings, or we didn't drink before a board. Ironically, Andrew's board did, but I said no booze at board meetings. But what I was trying to express and I still try and explain to families and interested people, is that it doesn't matter whether you're drunk or sober, you're still an alcoholic. Does that make sense?
Does. Yeah.
You still have alcoholic thinking. And so when I said I made decisions as an alcoholic, I did, but I wasn't pissed or stuck or effed up in any way, but I was still an alcoholic. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah. Yep.
It does. And no, sorry, go on.
Oh, so I was just going to say the other benefit I had was I had really strong people on my board, like Ray King, Glenn Casey, Susan Taylor, Mark Kellett. And you reckon they didn't hold me to account? You bet they did. But at the same time, the AFL industry is somewhat unique. It's a bit like, I suppose, the film and music industry. People want you in their restaurant. People want you in their pubs. People want you at their venues, and we can get enticed. I remember one president. I won't name him. But one president drank 2 bottles of red wine at a president's meeting at lunchtime. I didn't have a drink, because you don't want to see me in a board meeting pissed. It's not a good look.
So how do you feel when people, I guess, accuse might be too strong a word, but say that your lifestyle, your alcoholism and drug use, etc., affected the performance of the club through that successful period, 04, 05, etc., to the point where that was one of the blockages to us winning a flag? I mean, how does that sit with you?
Oh, I just don't listen to them. I mean, one of the things you get really good at when you're in an AFL president's role is you tend not to focus too much on the critics, because the critics are the person mostly that, I'll give you an example. That ex-ruckman from Darcy, when I came out all those years ago, his best effort was the fish rots from the head down. Please, a cliche. Give me a break. Now, had he have spent 10 minutes on Google, checking out the disease of addiction, checking out, from the American Society of Psychiatrists and et cetera like that, and then let me share with you the likes of Bob Hawke, Oprah Winfrey, Anthony Hopkins, Sir Winston Churchill. Some of the greatest leaders we've had have had issues. So when I hear people criticize, I just think to myself, you ignorant twit. You haven't done your research.
I guess the follow on from that is people that were within the club, or at least within the confines of the environment, guys like Danny Frawley, Nathan Burke, Nick Revolt at stages have all kind of, been asked about it, had their say, etc. I guess what do you have to say to, your ex-playing group about that time?
I'd say go and do your research. A lot of these guys are now paid to have opinions. And they're not just paid to have opinions, they're paid to make headlines. So they're conflicted. Because if you went and did your research and you spoke to the club doctor and you understood what you were talking about, you'd have a very different view. You ask most Australians who were some of the greatest leaders. Now, I'm not justifying it, but we're human and we do human things. But some of our greatest leaders, Sir Winston Churchill, Bob Hawke, for God's sake, highly, highly, highly functional and effective. But yes, they suffer the disease. So often, it's really interesting. Often, if someone, does criticize, and if I've got the time and if I'm interested enough, I'll sit them down and explain it. I know surgeons who've performed heart operations, but not whilst they're drunk, but, they suffer from alcoholism. I know judges, I know barristers, the whole thing about addiction is horribly misunderstood, and it is holding this country back from a mental health perspective. I personally believe we should legalise all drugs because we've lost the war. You know who's getting rich? The bikies, the crims. They're taking billions of dollars offshore every year. And yet young people and older people still want to, participate in alcohol and drugs. I liken drugs and alcohol. Alcohol's legal. So if you're having a beer, everyone goes, "You beauty, you're a good bloke," But I liken drugs to motor cars, About as many people a year die from motor vehicle accidents as they do from overdose. But we've got this thing called motor vehicles. They're legal. You've got to have a license. There are road rules. And my view is if we legalised all drugs, we'd make an extra $20 billion a year. We could educate our kids at school, build rehabs, cut our border controls and border force management and local policing and jails in half. But just to finish off on that, gents, in 1920 in America, alcohol was illegal. It's called prohibition. And the only people that got rich were the gangsters. Mm-hmm. And crime was doing that because each gangster wanted my patch or your patch or whatever. So they legalized it. And guess what happened? They created thousands of jobs. People started paying millions in tax, and they built roads and schools and hospitals and education. Is it perfect? Absolutely not. I'm not sure I know of many things on the planet that are perfect, but we've got to be practical, and that's just my view. So I honestly find, and I can share with you, I don't get upset because I find the people with the loudest criticisms have done the least work to understand the issue, and it is so much easier for them to finger point. And we say in recovery, if you finger point, there's 3 coming back at you, son. So what's your part in it?
Rod, last one from me on that subject. Do you have any regrets from your time as president of St Kilda Football Club?
No, because to live in regrets bullshit. Really, your job is to get better. And I think it's frighteningly, I got to know a bunch of other club presidents, a bunch of other senior executives, everyone's got a flaw. I don't know. I haven't met a perfect person yet. And so if we dwell on the regret side of things, God help you. Take ownership, seek to get better by all means. But, please don't live in regret. The point is, I suppose, yes, I had some shortcomings. Absolutely. I don't know another human being who has not. The only other bloke that had no shortcomings, they nailed him to a cross. But I was surrounded by highly competent, capable people like Craig King, Glenn Casey, Brian Waldron, Mark. It wasn't the Rod Butterss show, So, again, if people want to be critical of that, then go and do your homework and understand, what society really looks like. Anyway, my view.
A 2-part question from me. What's the unique aspect of being president of St Kilda? You've mentioned it a little bit, that every club's different. St Kilda's different to Collingwood, but St Kilda's different to the Western Bulldogs or North Melbourne, and North Melbourne's different to Fremantle. So I guess what's unique about being president of the Saints, and what are you most proud of during that tenure? I think most of us as fans highlight that period as arguably the most fun or the most enjoyable time that we had. Lovely to have won a flag, but not quite. But yeah, how do you assess that?
I think I can assess it like many years ago. I asked Graham Marn, the Essendon president, to stop bagging us in the bags again. So we happened to be playing them that weekend. So I turned up to the president's lunch and said, "Graham, just here to let you know I'm not staying, because we had an agreement you wouldn't bag the club any longer." So I stormed out, as was my nature, and he was embarrassed and whatever. But then Ron Evans very cleverly commissioned a report a study into why was Collingwood so successful? Because a gangster who ran a 2-up school bought all the players in the 20s for them to win 4 flags in a row. He built the basis. North Melbourne and Footscray were factory areas. The factory workers didn't live there. They lived, in Richmond and Collingwood and, yada, yada. And where did the factory owners live? They lived in Essendon. And then it got to St Kilda. And you know St Kilda, you know the area St Kilda. It's probably the most colourful area in Melbourne in many ways. And he said, now, St Kilda, you're just a bunch of thespians. For a long time, we were run by poets and artists and, you know, artistic types, not necessarily business types. And I thought Ron had showed wonderful foresight in, you know, you probably don't remember when Sam Newman bombarded Tomo's press conference and asked some inappropriate questions. And I don't know if you remember this, but Tomo came to me and he said, mate, you got to stand up with me this Saturday. So I compared Kerry Packer, Channel 9, Eddie Maguire to the gambling, what was his name? The gambling bloke in the 20s who had all these two-up schools. And the poor St Kilda workers would go to his two-up schools, lose all their money. And I said, well, nothing's changed. You know, you still got Channel 9, Kerry Packer, Crown Casino, Eddie Maguire, and guys, you're no longer welcome.
So you've talked earlier about Andrew Bassett doing a great job and everything, all that, basically putting his foot forward for the club.
Yeah.
You're Andrew Bassett right now. What's your next move? What's the next thing you're looking at the club and going, that's where we want to improve the club. That's where we want to lay a foundation to push us forward again. What's something that you would go, that's something the club needs?
Yeah, look, it's a good question, and I'm going to struggle to answer it because the one thing I do know, unless you're sitting around that board table, unless you're having coffees at least weekly with your coach, unless you're catching up with your director of footy, unless you've got access to all the data, you know, and data doesn't lie. So, you know, if I was to form a view, I think they're heading in the right direction. It's taking a bit longer than we would have liked. But the one thing I know to be true, if you're not in the middle of it and living and eating and breathing it every day of your life, then you're probably guessing. And you know, that's not my thing to guess. But you know, I think they're all right. I really do. They play some bloody exciting footy at times, don't they? And I remember talking to Len when he was in his mid-20s, and I said, Lenny, how long did it take you to get really comfortable out there? Like, this is your patch. He said, oh, about 80 games. So I think we're going to be okay.
Rod, I think there'll be a lot of Saints fans that will listen to this and go, oh, I don't give a shit about what this guy is telling us now. You know, we've been through enough, all that sort of stuff, you know, which is their prerogative. But it's pretty clear that you've done a lot of work, and you know, I wanted to give you the credit for speaking out and being open and honest and transparent about your journey, particularly over the last couple of years, and sharing that with the world, because I think there are a lot of people that go through these struggles and these issues that don't have the ability to talk about, that don't have a platform or the capacity to speak and verbalize. So I wanted to thank you for doing that and congratulate you. And I guess on a personal level, you know, how are you doing these days? How, you know, what's life like for Rod Butterss now?
Oh, mate, I'm blessed. I've got two beautiful children. I've got two beautiful grandchildren. I've got some exciting business stuff on the go, which is going to have a global impact. I'm writing, my thespian side is coming out, and I'm writing books and I'm writing poetry and I'm just being joyously me. And, you know, I wish I had my wisdom. I'm 66 now. I wish I had my wisdom 25 years ago when I was in the gig, but, you know, that's just wishful thinking. But with regard to alcohol and drugs and sex addiction and gambling, things the worst. Make no mistake. And it's flipping legal, and it's destroying family. You don't have the balls to face up to it. You know, a former AFL player, an Indigenous lad, he didn't play for the Saints. He played for another mob. But he told me his story of gambling addiction, and it oh, mate, the hair on the back of my neck, even when I talk about it now, it still flies, because as my beautiful daughter Ashley says, You don't need to suffer in silence.
Yeah, a former AFL coach told me a story about a player. He said that he could play AFL football for 250 years and not pay off his gambling debts, which was a bit of an alarming thing that came through out of all of that. But Rod, as we said, it was a tremendous time at the club, and I think one that we look back on as an incredible roller coaster with a lot more ups than there were downs. And thanks for coming on and giving us that honest assessment. One thing I can say about both our guests in terms of yourself and Grant Thomas is that you both love the club, and that was obvious. So thank you very much for your time.
This very frank discussion, and best wishes with the potty.